Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future of English Language Testing for International Students, a Times Higher Education webinar in partnership with TOEFL. My name is Alistair Lawrence. I'm the Special Projects Editor at THE, and I'll be chairing today's discussion. I'm delighted to be joined today by a panel of experts from academia and industry who are Wendy Alexander, Vice Principal International at the University of Dundee, Peter Flew, Associate Pro-Vice Chancellor for Academic Portfolio Development and Dean of the School of Education at the University of Roehampton, Michelle Hampton, who is Director for TOEFL Institutional Relations at ETS, and Fiona Orrell, who is Director of Assessment and an EAP tutor at the International Study and Language Institute at the University of Reading. There will be an opportunity to put questions to the panel during the final 5 or 10 minutes of the hour that we have scheduled today. So please feel free to write any questions that you have in the box in Zoom, and we will answer as many as possible before the end. Enabling international students to test their English language skills is one of the many areas of higher education undergoing digital transformation. Both staff and students require support to increase the access and the outcomes that are needed. Meeting those needs will form the basis of today's discussion. But before we begin, I'd like to hand over to Michelle so that she can tell us more about how TOEFL is supporting universities to reach these strategic goals. Michelle, over to you.
Thank you, Alistair. I appreciate that. I want to just bring up a slide, if I can, and speak to it about how TOEFL has been helping higher education really since 1964 by making sure that international students could study wherever they wanted in the world, in any English taught program or in a campus that offers English-based administration and testing and education. There's a TOEFL test for every stage of English language proficiency to guide learning, inform testing, deliver trusted information for confident, high-stakes decisions, and to help students achieve their academic goals. The TOEFL IBT, which, as I mentioned, has been around since 1964, is a fair, accurate, and unbiased test that can be taken securely in a test center or at home on a computer or on paper and pencil in a test center. You can be sure that your applicants are prepared for success by accepting the TOEFL IBT scores. It offers institutions a fair, accurate, and unbiased measure of an applicant's English language proficiency where it matters in the classroom. More than 11,500 institutions and programs in over 160 countries trust the TOEFL IBT test to help them make informed, confident decisions about the English language skills of their applicants. The TOEFL Essentials test is one of the newest that we've offered. It debuted in August of 2021. And the TOEFL Essentials test has been designed to be distinctly different from the TOEFL IBT test so that both tests will complement each other in your portfolio of accepted English language proficiency tests. TOEFL Essentials is a secure at-home assessment that uniquely combines quality and student friendliness while measuring the 4 core skills of English proficiency in a multi-stage adaptive format in about 1.5 hours. TOEFL Essentials brings more new applicants, expanded insights, and trusted scores to institutions. You can learn more at the website that you see on the screen. And now I'm going to stop share and return it to Alistair.
Great, thank you very much, Michelle. It's nice to have that context so people can be absolutely clear on what TOEFL's offering is. To start the discussion, I'd like to ask the panel, firstly, how they think the student journey is changing and how English language testing must evolve with it. You know, this could include confirming proficiency for English language, guaranteeing things like identity and authenticity in the digital delivery, and also enabling security around that. So there are metrics that need to be measured, but there are also questions about how delivery is changing too. Wendy, can I bring you in on this to tell us a little bit about what you think the key criteria is for English language testing against the backdrop of digital transformation?
Yeah, so Thank you very much, Alistair. It's really timely webinar to have. I mean, most of us on the sharp end found ourselves in the position of having to accept really whatever was out there as online tests in the circumstances of the first 2 years of COVID. And you know, often in the first instance, that wasn't, for example, IELTS, which is so widely accepted in the UK. TOEFL did have product, but we went to many of the new providers. And that therefore led us to rethink, how do we be fair to students, and what are the dimensions where we need assurance? And I think in the post-pandemic situation, where we are moving back to a more blended environment, so test centres still being closed in China, for example, and likely to stay so for the rest of the year, how do we have an unbiased and fair way of looking at the products? And certainly the way we thought about it at Dundee is to think about, firstly, does this test really establish English proficiency? Does it say what it does in the tin? And the long established providers do that well. That's more of a challenge, I think, for some of the newer providers. But there are then two other issues. How do you establish the identity of the test taker, that the person who's taking the test is who they say they are? And there's lots of different biometric and other ways of doing that. And thirdly, what assurance is, and this is mainly for remotely delivered testing, what can we do to ensure the security of the test, that the test taker isn't cheating or being helped? Now, I would hasten to add, that's not a hostility to people taking remote tests. People cheat in invigilated classrooms as well too. But it is about trying to create a kind of fair basis of assessment of the issues we need to think about if we want to give students the best offer possible, and say, you've the option of going to test centre, but you know, as we've rightly heard today, many people will want to take a test at home. What we found is the person in your institution who's likely to be able to measure the efficacy of English proficiency and the value of the test is probably not the same person who's qualified to comment on the other two dimensions I mentioned of, you know, guaranteeing the test taker's identity and ensuring the security of testing. And for us, we've just drawn up a set of protocols and lists and had a new English language board to try and think this through in a quick and systematic way. We're still in the foothills, but a quick and systematic way that lets us respond to the dynamic environment out there of more tests coming online, and deal with, you'll have seen in the public prints today, I mean, Times Higher Education, to, you know, coverage about tsunamis of cheating across all exams. It's timely for people to want assurance, because it is, as others have said, a really high stakes exam. Very often, you know, your ability to enter higher education is contingent on this. So really exciting times, lots of evolution, trying to create a fair basis of assessing the key dimensions. Feels really topical, and great to hear more about the TOEFL products.
Great, thank you, Wendy. If I could just pick up about the remark you made about the new English language board that you formed at Dundee. Was that something that you, at what point did you identify that, and how long did it take to put together and execute it?
So we had as I'm sure most institutions have, we had a COVID international group, and the COVID international group, in what I would describe as the 18 months height of the pandemic, managed all this stuff like moving our own pre-sessional English online. So basically the COVID group managed the emergency situation of both test approvals and online products. But when we stood that committee down a few months ago, we thought, what are the learnings about how the student journey is changing? And one of the new pieces of architecture we felt we needed was an English language board to try and expand the number of options that were available to English test takers, but do it in a way that wasn't just ad hoc as response to the pandemic, but was fair, and tried to deepen all our thinking about what the challenges and opportunities in this space are. And it was influenced by the fact that we knew, you know, IELTS is coming up with an online product as well too. I'd be really interested to hear more about the difference between the at-home version of the TOEFL IBT test and the TOEFL essential test, and how that meets student requirements. Okay, great.
Well, Michelle, if we could go back to you about that, it seems a great opportunity to ask you about it. And has it been done in response to the changes in assessing and planning that Wendy's describing at Dundee? And have you seen that at a lot of institutions?
We have seen many institutions struggling with this new situation of not only having to conduct their own classes remotely, but now also to offer their own assessments to their students in their classrooms remotely. And what does that entail? Maybe for the first time contracting with a remote proctor organization. Yeah. So there was a lot that they had to consider. And we as well. Now, fortunately for TOEFL, we had actually started the process well before COVID happened. We were already looking into remote proctor testing, what we would have to do to accommodate the unique security issues that are there, building on the state of art technology that we use currently for our test center administration. How can we add more to it? What other measures can we do to make the testing situation comfortable for students in a remote experience? So there was a lot to factor in. And because we were already in the midst of planning that, when COVID hit, we were able to then apply those learnings as quickly as within 6 weeks and get the home-based IBT out there in the market so that students could still test while they were restricted to being in their own homes around the world. And it was so successful from the test taker standpoint that we were able to then pivot and say that, okay, we can, in November of 2020, we can make this a permanent option. There will always been and have always been students who could not get to a test center because of distance, or perhaps they had loved ones in the home who had compromised health situations, and they didn't necessarily want to bring in outside germs, or maybe a caregiver situation where they could not get out freely to test for 3 hours. So having this remote option makes sense to them, and that's why it's going to continue to be long lasting. But it did require additional work on our part to make sure that we are using the technology provided to make sure that the students assess their computers first before they've ever signed up, paid a registration fee, committed to a test, to make sure that their technology in their home is functional and will work with the test and operate successfully without it failing at any point during those 3 hours. If students find that their system is not compatible, then of course we direct them to go to a test center. But it is a matter of making sure that the technology that they're using can support their experience. And that also means that they need to have a webcam. So we go through the process of explaining to students with a video. It's actually done in a cartoon manner so that it's engaging, but it is a visual sense because, again, people are at different stages in the English language journey. So some would understand everything that the voiceover says. Others would be able to understand the pictures a little bit better. So we tried to make sure that we encompass both. And this way it enables the students to demonstrate their proficiency. The essentials test also use that same technology that we created for the IBT home edition to offer the TOEFL essentials as an at-home assessment. So we're talking outstanding administration and training of the proctors and monitors who are watching the students during the entire testing event. We videotape the entire testing experience. And if the student is having any problems, either with their technology or heaven forfend with their own health situation, they can speak with the proctor at that time so that way they can get assistance or help. And that person who is monitoring the student is able to also contribute to us their feedback on that experience. So we can use that recording from the test day to also help us in any concerns about security. We ask the students to use ideally their passport as their document, or a government issued ID. It has to have a photo, it has to be government issued. And that's true in the test center or at home. But we have the students show that, and it's also in relation to their face because we use facial recognition software to make sure that it's a match. We also have the capability to make sure that any other biometrics that we're using match up to the test taker. So we look at that not only at the time of testing, but also as we go through the scoring end as well and reporting. So we do try to incorporate all of the technology and AI support that is available at any given moment and adapt as necessary to make sure that we're using the most current and accurate supports for testing.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Fiona, if I can come to you next, just to pick up on a couple of points that Wendy and Michelle both referenced in their opening remarks, which is how much do the challenges that persist around technology, the setting of an exam, and also the well-being of the takers continue to create challenges for you when you are looking to diversify and scale your online testing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's the coming back to the evolution of the student journey as well. There's a tension there between having a standardized, directly comparable measure of English language level, and then an understanding that no one test can prepare or measure all of the variables that might impact on the student journey. But what we want to see is that a test has got evidence of its validity and reliability in terms of it measures what's relevant to the student journey. So what's the student likely to be doing at university, and how is that changing now and in the future with the shift to online learning? And does that test measure those language skills necessary for that? And then the security, because we do need to meet the students where they are. We were talking about the well-being of the students and meeting their needs. So if their need is for a remote online version of a test, a way to evidence their English language skills, then we need to be meeting that and providing the security for it, because there are going to be geographical, technical, financial issues for some students with accessing the means to evidence their language levels. So at-home online testing can widen access, but as Michelle was saying there, that's only if you've got the technology that's needed to do that. So we need to think about that, and with the platforms that are providing online testing, that some of them are taking into account the kind of the bandwidths that are needed, how the tests are formatted, and how to make that more accessible for a wider group of students. And then where it's a CELT that has to be done in a language centre, is it always that the student has to travel potentially hundreds of miles to take one, or could we be looking at more localised testing, or could the testing organisations be looking at more localised testing going to the student more than having the student come to them? So I think there are a number of ways that we could work on that.
And what to you has been the biggest improvement that you've managed over the time you've been basically been forced to shift so much of this delivery online?
I think it's becoming more aware of the affordances really of the technology for online testing. So we're moving away from the emergency mode of, oh, we have to put it online, to thinking, oh, well, actually now we're putting it online. What affordances are there? Perhaps we can be more creative. If we're looking at, there's a lot of work ongoing in a lot of universities about transforming the curriculum, streamlining assessment, making it more authentically aligned with workplace practices. Well, then technology can afford that for us, perhaps more efficiently than in the traditional methods of assessments. And English language learning also can be more, perhaps English language testing, can be more authentically aligned with that type of assessment. And also the processing of data, the information that you can get on an individual student's performance on a test when they're taking it online, there's far richer and more data available for analysis there that we can use. So I think we're moving away from we have to do it to there are a lot of affordances here. How can we use them better?
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Peter, if I could bring in you at this point to get a perspective on a couple of things. One is whether you've adopted a cross-functional team approach in response to moving teaching and assessment online, and also the other one is to ask a bit about Fiona's point about integrating skills education into these new forms of digital assessment at a time when it seems like the pedagogy of universities is under more scrutiny than ever from all sides, really.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll take the second one first. I'm coming this from an academic department point of view. So from, I lead a school of education. We have a lot of international students coming through, and I have a lot of lecturers who's saying, well, this person's met the admissions criteria, because we don't get involved as academics in the admissions criteria. It's set with the TOEFL or IELTS level, and yet we're teaching students who cannot access our materials because they don't have the ability to critically think, or to, particularly at the postgraduate level, or to be able to argue a case, because what we're seeing on the entry numbers doesn't match what we're seeing in the classroom. And I see these tests as a gateway to start the journey rather than the end of the journey. So if there's some way that we can use the new technologies that are coming in for the testing to improve the specificity of the test for a particular course or particular level. So for example, if you're talking about level 7, you want somebody who can engage critically and have an argument. So if there's a speaking part of the test, and I'm afraid I don't know too much about the details of testing, is there a chance for somebody to have a proper dialogue rather than just being able to learn some answers? Because we put a lot of resources in for those who struggle when they start, because we want them to succeed. But it would be nicer if they had a much better chance to succeed if the test itself was designed to support and develop students. I mean, I like what Fiona said about having some data to work out what is actually going on at the test centre when people are taking a test, what are they struggling with, what could be improved. And if we could improve our testing, we could even have some information, even if someone passes a test, we've got some really good raw information that can support them in the start of their journey. I think that's really important. What was the first part of your question?
I mean, it was like how your institution in particular had responded. Are you using cross-functional teams? Are you looking to scale and diversify digital delivery of assessment in different ways? I mean,
I mean, we've virtually got rid of all exams as far as we can, as far as assessment. Are you talking about this assessment for new students, international students coming in?
Yes.
Yeah. No, yeah, I'm not. That's not part of my area as an academic. That's the admissions team. So perhaps other colleagues can answer that one.
Okay, great, thank you. Michelle, if I could pick up on the points that Fiona and Peter made about the requirement for getting the right data and getting the right metrics from data in order to be able to learn about how students are responding to being tested in different ways now, and perhaps using that to refine the offering that you provide for English language testing. What are the most common data points that your university partners find useful at TOEFL?
Overall, they really find that the fact that we provide online the performance descriptors of what that score earned by the test taker means. The old phrase used to be the can-do statements. You know, if the student is able to score this, then they can perform at this level, or they can do the following tasks. That certainly has been important. The fact that the way TOEFL is designed, it's an integrated test. So students read a prompt that, let's say, a lecturer would give in a classroom. They hear a lecturer and a student discuss the content, but not every single detail. And then the test taker has to write the answer to a question about what was heard and what was read, or they are providing an argument of their opinion in response to the text that they've read or the prompt that they've heard, so that way it is just like in a classroom where you would have the student, you know, listening to the conversation going on between their classmates and the instructor, and they would have read the homework, hopefully, ahead of time. So now they're being asked to give an answer. So the fact that the assessments have a built-in extemporaneous opportunity where the students haven't prepared, they have to answer these questions based on what they've heard. That in and of itself is a tremendous help. But I think one thing that's most important for the institutions is the fact that they can look at not only the scores and the information we provide online, but also they can hear the speaking sample captured on test day of the student answering a question in the speaking section where they had to read and listen and then respond. They can read the actual essay that the student wrote on test day, compare it to the other writing information that the student provided in the application for admission. Each application for admission contains many points that you can use to compare or assess the student's English proficiency in support of or in contrast to their performance on the standardized test. So using all of that gives you a holistic view of the student's ability. If you're lucky enough to have the chance to interview the student directly as an institution, that gives you the opportunity to ask them probing questions on content or the academic material that's necessary, but to get an overall view to see if whether this person could be an excellent graduate teaching assistant. You can use the assessment to give you at least a baseline and then compare it to everything else.
Okay, great, thank you. I wanted to ask the panel of university representatives if there was any anxiety from students about there being a parity of fairness and accuracy between online and offline testing. Perhaps if students have the choice between being tested online or in person, do you now perhaps create an extra pressure where they're not sure what is the right option for them? And if so, how do you respond if you to receive a query along those lines?
So we're certainly keen to have both options on the menu, subject to feeling some of these security thresholds and things are met. And you know, there's a price point implication. Coming back to proctoring, the way we've tried to understand proctoring is, you know, there are essentially three options. You have one-to-one invigilation of the person, which easily is the highest cost, but probably the most secure. You then have group invigilation, where the computer through AI has a red flag when there's something like, you know, inappropriate eye movements or noise or whatever, and the invigilator can intervene. So obviously there your ratio of student to invigilator is much less. And the third one is record and review, where the onus is either on the test provider or yourself to review, and that's obviously the least secure but the cheapest option. So there is a so it's not quite as simple as, you know, you can do an online test or you can go to a test center. We'd like to give people both those options, but within that we probably do have a threshold of comfort around the type of proctoring we're looking for, and most institutions would obviously start more conservative and move from that position. I think, and it comes to questions being asked in the chat, it's how do we say to people that English language testing, the test is a point in time with a range of data, as Michelle says, but it's the starting point, not the ending point, which is the point Peter made about how do you complement it with in-sessional English training when people arrive. And that in-sessional English, which is probably geared directly to the coursework they're doing, we've certainly found that we're more comfortable doing that in-house. So actually we increasingly use our in-house department to do in-sessional English through the whole of the first semester when students arrive working directly on their coursework. We have had some success with making the pre-sessional, you know, achieving your level, making that bespoke to cohorts of types of students. But, you know, fundamentally, every arriving student has to open a bank account, go to the post office, you know, sign a contract. So we don't want to make it too bespoke in terms of the initial threshold level. And I thought the other really interesting thing raised in the chat was, can English language tests be expected to test academic preparedness for a foreign culture? And I think this is a really important point. I mean, obviously we're testing English both so they can succeed academically, but partly also because of visa requirements. But there is a whole set of complementary issues around academic preparedness, which doesn't interest UKVI and the visa authorities, but deeply matters to the quality of the learning experience for that student. And I do think, you know, how we ensure that complementary offer around critical thinking, but also just around good practice of things like plagiarism, expectations. These are very culturally attuned. I think all of us feel we could probably do better in that domain, and we probably don't have to all do it individually. We probably could rely on better curated online resources, but it is although the visa authorities aren't pushing us for it, I think institutionally it's a good challenge, particularly when people haven't had the chance to travel because of COVID. The difficulties of getting everyone onto the same level playing field when they arrive around academic preparedness and having English reinforcement through in-sessional training are really top of mind for us just now.
So is that a question of aiming to create a floor standard of I guess cultural immersion and understanding by the end of year one or by the end of year three? Is it becomes a whole other type of pedagogy that you're, like you say, you're trying to weave through the actual knowledge-based curricula that is the course or qualification people have come to take.
I think a lot of that is in induction weeks. And of course, induction weeks and immersion weeks at the beginning, welcome weeks, have been ruined by COVID for the last few years. So there's a high bar for this year about whether you can have a fantastic cultural immersion when people arrive and have really intensive training around the expectations of pedagogy in the, well, for us in the UK context.
Okay.
Can I echo that one, please, Alistair? Yes, Wendy, the having English sessions throughout the course, I think, is really, really important. And also about the culture and the academic culture. Part of that could well be with your careers training, because the focus for many universities obviously is making sure that they go into the right jobs and the degree level jobs at the end of it, and actually being able to function as a future employee is very, very important. So where it isn't, as I say, it is very much the start, this test, and it's up to us to say, we're taking your fees, we're going to do whatever we can to support you, to help you pass, to help you get the career that you want to get. And I think looking in the chat, there's a couple of points about people saying, well, do academics know anything about what these tests contain? And I don't think they do. I really don't. I think that would be really useful if we do explain, because there is a feeling that students are given to us ready to learn. And the closer we can get the entry criteria and the tests to the academics and have a conversation to say, okay, they've met this benchmark, is the benchmark correct? Regardless of that, they are our students and we want them to succeed. So I think that's a really good point if we do try and educate academics as to what actually the tests contain.
Is that something you've seen any evidence of, that bridging the gap between the the assessment for the onboarding and the continuous academic curriculum that the students will be joining? Are things starting to improve there, or do you think there are ways that, is it again a case of building new teams and focus groups and making more decisions at strategy level, where the right people sit down together to figure out how they're going to measure those different things? It's
well, for example, at education at Roehampton, we've noticed a very big increase in the number of education postgraduate international students, and we have, rather than every academic gets an hour per student to be their academic guidance or personal tutor, we've hired somebody who was an international student himself, and he has a pastoral and English language role, and it's a trial for this year to basically engage with all of the international students to see whether they're settled in, they're succeeding, and they can access the curriculum. And we're going to be analysing that at the end of the year to see if that's made an impact. Okay, thank you. Michelle, are there any cases you can think of from your university partners who are particularly aware of the need to bridge this gap and inform academic tutors of what is contained within the test and help that complement? Or is it still a bridge that needs to be crossed for a lot of universities?
Well, it is a bridge that still needs to be crossed with many universities. We publish information. We have all of our research available for free online, over 250 documents. I think TOEFL is probably one of the most evaluated tests ever. We publish research that's independent, done separate from us, some that also questions the test, as well as things that are in support of it. We want people to be able to understand the assessment that they're giving. I know for myself, for the past 10 years, I've been on the road talking to university staffs at the graduate, undergraduate level, postgraduate, to help them understand the assessment and what it measures and what it can and cannot do, so that they are using it fairly and accurately. There's been a movement. It started in the US, it eventually is, I think, started to go worldwide, of test optional. It doesn't really impact the English language proficiency testing world, because many educators realize they don't have the skills of a trained ESL or ESOL educator to assess a student's English proficiency. But there is still that question of, well, what is it that I'm getting? And I think if the educational community can have access to what is involved in each assessment and can create their own grid or use the research that we've provided about our assessment compared to some of the others in the field, I think that would give them a great deal of insight and possibly greater confidence in their decision in deciding to accept a certain test or all tests, or why they're accepting it and how it could parlay in their evaluation and placement of a student in the appropriate coursework. And I think, much to Peter's point, English for academic purpose is slightly different. In that case, it can be specific to the discipline, but goodness gracious, the number of disciplines that would need to have their own English language proficiency tests to get at that nitty-gritty level could be overwhelming and, heaven forbid, intimidating to applicants. And we don't want that. We want people to go to university. We don't want to create roadblocks. So it is a fine line to walk. But I think it's definitely one that understanding what you're getting, being that knowledgeable consumer of the assessment, really can make a difference in an institution's ability to feel that they are getting students who are capable and competent the day they arrive, or those who might need additional support that they can give them.
Great, thank you. Fiona, if I could pick up on a couple of points made by Michelle and by Peter before. There's how much can peer-led tutoring or assessment or just feedback loops with people who have perhaps been through the system and forming a different type of alumni engagement, can that help with things like attainment, retention, helping to the people acclimatized to a different culture and using their language for those purposes as well as academic purposes? Do you think there is a future there where universities can build out along those lines to improve engagement and also get better feedback from students about what they want?
I do think we could do more work perhaps on working with student partners, and we do it better in some areas than on others. I mean, if we're looking at the criticism of test scores, that they don't show a student's academic preparedness, but we have to think about what the test is designed to do, and that's perhaps the language skills for the beginning of a course of academic study. But then there are a lot of other variables that will come into play and impact on the student's journey throughout, and their, that it could be anything to do with their satisfaction with the program, what's happening at home, a lot of other variables that can come into play besides the language. But what we can do is, if we work with student partners, is perhaps work on gathering data better on what those variables are over the course of an academic year, and then develop the support systems that are needed for those. And those are perhaps done better working with academic partners. We've worked with our students on partnerships in terms of developing academic integrity, in-sessional English provision, and they are best placed to really identify what it is that they're struggling with and how best they might be helped. But we need to be really tracking the student progression and the milestones that they're encountering and the difficulties that they're encountering, so that we can give a cohesive support system to them and a relevant support system to them, rather than one that's based on what we think the issues might be. But coming back to the issue of academic, I think there's work to be done there on the understanding, the assessment literacy, the understanding of what it is that a test score is telling us about the student and what it is that it isn't telling us. So it's not the entire picture of the student. We're not getting that from a test score. We're getting an idea, but we need to look at everything else that comes in with an application. And it's very easy to be critical and say, well, this doesn't tell us that a student's academically has the academic skills that they need, the critical thinking skills. But then you need a test that can be applied in many different regions and across many different students. And if you try to focus too much on the academic skills that might be needed for your particular academic culture, then you're excluding a lot of students that might otherwise actually do very well, as long as they get the support that they need.
Thank you. I wanted to pick up on a slightly related point that's been put to us in the questions, and it's about the issue of transnational education and how to measure effectively for that as well. I'm aware that we do have predominantly UK-based panel today, but Michelle, perhaps I could ask you about the international experience that TOEFL has of going out across Europe, and what additional challenges exist when we look at transnational education and degrees taught in English, but not in predominantly English-speaking language in countries.
Certainly. So, for example, Saudi Arabia, if a student is going there for an engineering degree, very popular discipline there, they need to know Arabic, obviously, because the bulk of their courses are going to be in that. But then there are English taught courses in the engineering curriculum. So the student, many times in going to a transnational campus, may need to be versant in more than just English, and certainly more than their native tongue. So it is a case where the student might be acquiring an additional language, a third or fourth language, in order to make sure that they are competent in their academic studies in that country. That's challenging, access, as we've discussed, to the training that you need in order to be fluent enough at a university level is different than just, I'm going to take a holiday and I need to know how to find the bathroom. Very, very different. So you have to understand that the students are investing, hopefully, a great deal of time in bolstering their multilingual capabilities, and also making sure that the discipline that they want to pursue is something that really does engage them, because heaven forbid, if they get into it and it's not what they expected, or is not giving them the opportunity to study the courses in their discipline that they like right away. For example, if they have to go through either pre-sessional or sessional English classes, sometimes the students resent having to do that before they can study their discipline. And unfortunately, some will drop out because of that very reason. They will try to find an institution that won't have that rigid a requirement, or will let them sort of skate by taking just 1 year or 1 semester or 1 term of English proficiency and then go in. Or they'll test and test and test and test and test until they can get a high enough score to meet the magic number to get out of taking the pre-sessional English curriculum. So there's a challenge in making sure that you are not turning off the students who want to consider your transnational campus. It's a lot to consider, but it is still a worthwhile opportunity and a great benefit to those students who do end up enrolling and being successful on those campuses.
And is this a challenge that you've noted existing at undergraduate and postgraduate level?
Yes, unfortunately.
Okay, got it. We've got about 10 minutes left before we'll concentrate more on the questions coming in from the audience. Another point that we had for discussion today was the impact of lifelong learning. This is something that various countries are in at different points along the journey of, and deciding what they want their criteria to be, what they want their micro-credential offering to be, what exactly they want universities to pivot to increase access, which seems to be a quite sort of political hot topic in the UK and also other countries. When we look at English language testing as part of that, do the panel see an opportunity, or is it simply too early to tell what the offering needs to be for lifelong learning to really decide what the testing should be for a lifelong, for micro-credentials and shorter courses and other things that are popular choices in a lifelong learning program? Peter, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, we're quite privileged that we're one of the 22 providers who is doing the OFS pilot for the short courses for the lifelong learning. Ours is an education for teaching assistants, so we have some courses starting in September which they'll have access to the student loan company's loans. And we've had to think really hard about the entry criteria, not necessarily with English. Because to be a teacher, if you want to be a teacher, you have to have GCSE English, Maths, and for primary science as well. But to be a teaching assistant, there are no prerequisite requirements. So for us to be asked by the government to create a course for teaching assistants, which they should be succeeding at, and it's at level 4, we need to think very carefully about what those requirements are. And so it's desirable to have a GCSE level 4, but not necessarily compulsory. We recognize that it'll be a completely different type of student than somebody who's signed up for a 3-year degree. So somebody who is basically looking at it as accredited CPD, which is funded by the government insofar as that they're given a loan. We've not thought about it in the context yet of international students, but it is a product that we've created, which we can sell, regardless of who actually pays for it. So we will be looking at the right level for international students, level of English, to suit the job that they're doing, I think. I think that's the key thing, but it's very, very early. I mean, the lifelong learning pilot, interesting, it starts in September 22 and the pilot runs till August 2025. So the government, thankfully, is actually giving us some time to assess this before they roll it out a bit more fully.
Okay, thank you. Fiona, Wendy, I was wondering, do you think from your own student bodies what the appetite will be to engage in lifelong learning, either through transnational students or international students? Do you think that there is unmet demand there right now?
I'm not entirely sure, if I'm honest. I'm not sure. We have seen some teachers from our partners overseas who've come to us for short courses in development and training. I think just what I found really interesting there, we're thinking about the lifelong learning and the link there with English language skills and education, just really briefly, I think is our growing understanding in English language skills teaching and assessment is the importance of feedback. It's always been there, assessment and feedback is important, but it is growing in understanding of the impact of feedback and the need there is for student agency in acquiring and using feedback effectively. And that really is throughout your academic and your professional career. So identifying your current performance against an externally expected performance or where you want to go with your own personal professional goals is feedback, essentially dealing with and working with feedback. So I think that part of it links into that lifelong learning in terms of what we do with English language.
Okay, thank you. Wendy, your thoughts?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think one of the things that's been really clear to us in the last year is how much immersion in an English language context, just in the UK, is part of people raising their proficiency over time. And so the consequence of the pandemic for all of our remote learners in China, we ended up setting up a special China services hub that did have a China language capability for things like the technology. In terms of making sure that our remote learners, but also our transnational education learners in China had sufficient English to complete the course, I have to say we found for people who are studying entirely transnational education, overseas, the Scottish degree tends to be 4 years, and we're devoting very much of the first year to really foundation and English language level, but doing it as part of the course, which is possible when you have a 4-year program, rather than expecting people to have reached that level in advance of commencing, which obviously is our expectation when people are located onshore in the UK. In terms of our micro-credentials offer, I think we, as others have suggested, really good offer in the UK. For UK students, it's probably about literacy expectations. And of course, I saw the minister yesterday insisting that people were at A-level plus to have access to the loans. So clearly that debate is going to run and run. In terms of the relevance of our micro-credentials to our global markets, we're kind of wrestling with that now of getting the content right, and we haven't solved the problem of English language expectations for those enrolling on micro-credentials in third-party locations. I do think myself that excuse me, some of the major platforms for Coursera, edX, FutureLearn are really quite far advanced in having thought about how to package the product and institutions thinking how they can be complementary to the platforms that are out there rather than maybe reinventing the wheel themselves is certainly in offshore. It will be a very live debate in months and years to come.
So is there a question really, you think we're on the cusp of having to put together the different pieces of the puzzle, from the English language testing to the MOOC provision to the feedback loops and that we're building with students, and also the data that you're gathering along the way?
Absolutely. I mean, the issue with the government's offer, and I'm no expert in this because it's slightly different in Scotland, but it's not clear whether the ability to borrow up to £37,000 over a lifetime, and that's an offer for, I think, people domiciled in the UK. So somebody can correct me on that. But one of the interesting things is how do how do you balance your domestic offer around lifelong learning and have a global offering as well too, and who meets the loaner outgoings associated with that. All exciting times to come.
Okay, great. Yes, it'll be definitely be a work in progress, I think. We've had a couple of questions from the audience that we'll try and wrap up before the end. Michelle, one was a very specific question about the use of facial recognition and how this can be perhaps seen as unreliable for some genders or some demographics. If you could perhaps tell us a little bit more about the safeguarding and the assurances that need to put in place, that TOEFL puts in place around the facial recognition software that it uses, please.
Certainly. So we make sure that the software that we're using is state of the art. We also work with our own government security aspect, our own home affairs, I guess you could say, to make sure that the technology that we're using is, again, reputable. But what we're trying to do is, again, look at the main points of facial recognition compared to their passport photo, compared to the photo that we take of the test taker on test day, and compare it to the individual. So we're trying to make sure that all three match, so that the person who sat for the test is actually the same person that was in that passport photo, and actually the person who was in the photo that we captured at test day, so that no one, came and swapped seats with them, sort of thing. And we use that for all of our testing, whether it's in the test center or a remote application. We want to make sure that the individual that is submitting the scores and sitting for the exam is going to be the one that shows up on your campus and at your door.
And there's another question about the technology gap between students. We acknowledged this a little bit at the top of the hour, just the huge amount of variation between devices and access that some students have to assessment. Is that a question of having a conversation with the university and deciding what the best approach to take is for a particular cohort? Are you seeing a range of solutions being offered, or does it really have to be approached and tackled on a case-by-case basis?
We are seeing a range, and I think it really depends on what each institution is willing and capable to do, and that is truly their preference and their call. There are many institutions that have been accepting international students really since the day they opened their doors, and then there are some that are relative newcomers who are trying to learn the roadmap very quickly. So there is a big variety.
And I suppose another question related to that is the reassurances that you have to give people about data security and the different laws that exist in different countries. I mean, obviously there's GDPR in the EU, which the UK still is nominally in line with. And then there's PIPL in China that's come in fairly recently, which is another set of data protection laws that need to be adhered to. How is this factored into the way that you control the flow of data and provide access to it?
We do monitor that for all of the assessments that TOEFL provides. But what we tend to go with, because we are rather risk averse, we go with the most stringent requirements and try to meet those. Because if we can do that, then we know that everyone else should be comfortable with it. And currently it is predominantly the GDPR, but as you mentioned, as China releases its new standards, we will compare it and see what else we can add to it to be even more focused on the privacy of the individual and protecting that. We provide to all of our test takers a statement about the privacy surrounding their scores and their personal information that they're providing when they take the test, so that way they can also understand what the process is. It's available on the website, it's in the online bulletin about the assessment, so that they can always go back to it and refer to it. And if necessary, when we do update it, we post those updates as well. So it's a matter of always being 100% clear and open and honest with our test takers, but also with institutions, because they also are concerned about the privacy of the data and the information that is being shared. And we also, with all of our institutions, do have them commit to understanding the importance of the confidentiality and the privacy of the data that they are exposed to.
Great, thank you very much, Michelle. We've got about 5 minutes left, so what I'd like to do is ask each of the university panel representatives if there is a single thing that they think is achievable in the next 12 months or so that would significantly help them and their colleagues and also their students in the delivery and the taking of English language assessment. It's a bit of a wish list question, I guess, but I'm hoping that there'll be something that you think is that's both practical as well. Wendy, like you. Oh no, Peter, sorry, go first.
Yeah, I was just trying to think of something that quickly was hard. One thing that we haven't mentioned is access to displaced students who are refugees. There's a growing number around the world. If there's somewhere that we can support them being able to access the tests so that they can come and study here, that would be really good.
Okay, great. Wendy?
I would love to see some of the things we talked at the beginning and what's going on in the chat about saying whether by JISC, whether by BALLOP, you know, the kind of professional association for English language providers, there is no survey that somebody can click on and say, here is a matrix of the test providers and how they stack up against those 3 criteria of the quality of English language proficiency for all the reasons that Michelle's alluded to. I'm just going to name it. Duolingo isn't going to be as good for academic testing as is, you know, TOEFL and IELTS with a decades-long character of this. But there is no one reference point by any higher education body that you can go to that says, here is some sort of matrix or scoring against the testing of the English language to say how they establish the security. We just heard the 3 from TOEFL. How do we establish the identity of the test taker? And thirdly, around security, it's not an absolute. As I said, you've got, you know, a menu of different cost options around proctoring, and do they offer all 3 and how do they stack up? That would just answer everybody's at least short-term needs of creating a basis for a really kind of grown-up dialogue, and is not all scuttling around doing the same thing of trying to figure out what that matrix looks like for the major players in the market. So it's really a cry to JISC or to BALLOP to say that would be a real service to the community, and just annually update that survey. And it'll come, we're just not quite there yet. And I totally agree with Michelle that it would give us a basis for seeing stringency, both the test taker, because it's high stakes testing for them, and for the institution, because we can't be bringing to the table those who are not ready to learn and study. So I think that standardization of what the offers are by an impartial third-party source would accelerate the adoption of the technology that is out there and is robust and stringent, and that's not the case with everything that's in the marketplace, and sorting through that for us would be wonderful.
Okay.
Can I respond to that, Alistair? Because I was so happy and excited to hear you say that, Wendy. So my other role outside of Reading, I'm the testing officer for BALLOP. So I took over last year. And at the moment, BALLOP has a set of testing guidelines, which is a description of some of the major tests, but not all of the major tests. And it's impossible to keep up with that unless it's your full-time job. So what I'm just initiating now, I announced at the AGM, and we're kicking off, is a project to do exactly what you've just requested. So it's an online resource. So I'm putting together a working group with representatives from testing organizations, exam platforms, experts in English for academic purposes, experts such as yourself. I'm trying to get together a working group for that. We'll plan out the project for a year, and then the project will run for a couple of years. At the end of so at the end of 2 to 3 years, what we will have is exactly what you've just described. So it's an online resource that's regularly kept up to date, a one-stop place where you can go and find out about the test construct, what it's measuring, how it's measuring that, what you could reasonably infer from a student's performance on that test. A link through to what the test providers, because as Michelle has described, you can get a lot of information from TOEFL on the test content, and on what a student at this level looks like in terms of what they can produce. So there'll be links through to that, links through to published research, the security of the test, and then, as Andrew pointed out in the chat, the accessibility of it and how students are being helped there. So that's in progress, and I'm really happy you asked.
Great, thank you very much. Michelle, I appreciate this is a very loaded question, but would you welcome this kind of benchmarking across the industry?
Yes.
I mean, you did say that, yeah,
Yes.
okay, great, yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. Right. Well, it's nice to end with us all in agreement on something. Just to wrap up now, this is all we have time for, I'm afraid. But thank you so much for everyone to coming along, taking part today. We have more than 100 people in the in the audience contributing throughout. We really do value the insights and the contributions that you make during these panel discussions. I'd like to say a big thank you to the panelists. So to Wendy, to Peter, to Michelle and Fiona, thank you also for coming together and sharing your insights with us. There will be an on-demand recording of this session available on the THE website. There will also be a summary article that will highlight the key findings for you and any colleagues that we welcome you to distribute with colleagues or share on social media. This will be published on the THE website, and THE will send an email notifying you when it's online. So everybody who is registered today will receive a copy and a link to both of those things. So that's it, we're out of time, but thank you all very much for joining us, and we hope to see you at future THE events. Thank you and goodbye.